I'm Sophia, 28 years old, and 3 months ago, I discovered wedding photos of my fiancé Marcus online. He was kissing another woman in a white dress, surrounded by smiling faces I recognized. The bride wasn't me. It was my cousin Isabella, and standing proudly behind them in the photos was my own mother. Tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched the man I loved marry someone else. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins 2 years ago when I thought I had found my happily ever after. I was working as a graphic designer for a boutique marketing agency in Portland, Oregon, living in a cozy apartment downtown with my rescue cat Luna. Life was good, but it felt incomplete until I met Marcus Chen at a coffee shop on a rainy Thursday morning in November. He was sitting alone at a corner table, laptop open, completely absorbed in what looked like architectural blueprints spread across the small surface. I had just ordered my usual lavender latte when a gust of wind from the opening door sent his papers flying. Without thinking, I rushed to help him gather the scattered documents, our hands briefly touching as we both reached for the same sheet. Marcus was exactly the kind of man I had always imagined myself with. At 31, he had the quiet confidence of someone who knew his place in the world. His dark hair was perpetually slightly messy, as if he had been running his fingers through it while concentrating, and his brown eyes held a warmth that made me feel instantly comfortable. He worked as a structural engineer for a firm that specialized in sustainable building design, a passion that became evident within minutes of our first conversation. We talked for 3 hours that day, long after both our coffees had grown cold. He told me about his latest project, a community center being built with entirely recycled materials. I shared my dreams of starting my own design studio, focusing on branding for environmentally conscious businesses. The connection was immediate and genuine, built on shared values and an easy chemistry that made conversation feel effortless. Our first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the Pearl District. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, which I learned was typical for him, and brought me a single sunflower because he remembered me mentioning they were my favorite. The evening flew by as we discovered more common ground. We both loved hiking, preferred old movies to new ones, and had complicated relationships with our families. Marcus grew up in Seattle, the only child of parents who divorced when he was 12. His mother remarried and moved to Vancouver, while his father remained in Seattle, eventually starting a new family. Marcus described feeling caught between two worlds, never quite belonging fully to either. This resonated with me deeply, as I had my own family complexities to navigate. My mother, Catherine Rodriguez, had always been the dominant force in our household. After my father walked out when I was 15, she threw herself into controlling every aspect of our lives with the intensity of someone who refused to be caught off guard again. She worked as a real estate agent in our hometown of Salem, Oregon, and had built a successful career through sheer determination and an almost supernatural ability to read people's desires and weaknesses. Growing up, I watched her manipulate situations to her advantage, with a skill that was both impressive and unsettling. She could convince reluctant sellers to accept lowball offers and persuade hesitant buyers that they absolutely needed the overpriced house she was showing them. Her success came from understanding what people wanted to hear and delivering it with convincing sincerity. My younger brother Daniel, now 25 and working as a paramedic, had always been her obvious favorite. He shared her olive complexion and dark eyes, while I inherited our father's lighter coloring and stubborn streak. More importantly, Daniel rarely questioned her decisions or challenged her authority, something I had never been able to manage. Our extended family dynamics were equally complicated. My mother's sister, Elena, lived in Sacramento with her daughter Isabella, who was exactly my age. Growing up, Isabella and I had been forced into a relationship that felt more like competition than friendship. Every family gathering became an opportunity for our mothers to compare our achievements, our appearances, our life choices. Isabella had always been everything I wasn't. Where I was introverted and focused on creative pursuits, she was outgoing and social, the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. She had long, glossy black hair that she wore in elaborate styles, a figure that looked perfect in everything she wore, and a laugh that carried across rooms. More than that, she had mastered the art of making adults feel charmed and impressed within minutes of meeting her. Throughout our childhood and teenage years, I watched Isabella effortlessly win over teachers, family friends, and especially our mothers. She knew exactly what to say to make people feel special and important, a talent that seemed to come as naturally to her as breathing. Meanwhile, I struggled with social anxiety and preferred spending time alone with my sketchbooks and design projects. The comparison became more painful as we entered our 20s. Isabella landed a job in marketing for a luxury resort chain, traveling to exotic locations and posting enviable photos on social media. She dated a series of successful, attractive men, each relationship documented in detail for our family to admire and discuss. I, on the other hand, focused on building my career and spent most of my free time working on freelance projects or hiking alone in the Oregon wilderness. When I finally introduced Marcus to my family 8 months into our relationship, I was nervous, but hopeful. He represented something I had never had before: a genuine partnership with someone who valued my ideas and supported my ambitions. I thought my mother would appreciate his stability and success, his obvious devotion to me, and his respectful demeanor. The introduction took place during our annual summer barbecue at my mother's house in Salem. I had spent weeks preparing Marcus for the experience, explaining the family dynamics, and warning him about my mother's tendency to ask probing personal questions. He assured me that he was looking forward to meeting everyone and that he understood how important family approval was to me. The day started well enough. Marcus arrived with flowers for my mother and wine for the gathering, immediately earning points for his thoughtfulness. He spent time talking with Daniel about emergency medical procedures, showing genuine interest in my brother's work. He complimented my mother's garden and offered to help with the grilling, displaying the kind of respectful engagement that usually won people over. But I noticed my mother watching him with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She asked detailed questions about his job, his family background, his future plans. When he mentioned that his firm was expanding and that he was being considered for a partnership track position, her interest sharpened visibly. She wanted to know about his salary, his investment portfolio, his plans for buying property. Isabella wasn't there that day, as she was traveling for work, but my mother made sure to show Marcus numerous photos of her. She described Isabella's accomplishments in glowing terms, emphasizing her beauty, her success, her popularity with men. I felt embarrassed by the obvious way she was promoting my cousin, but Marcus seemed to take it in stride, politely admiring the photos and making appropriate comments. After Marcus left that evening, my mother pulled me aside for what she called a serious conversation. We sat on her back porch as the sun set behind the hills, the same spot where she had delivered countless lectures.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Throughout my childhood. "He seems very nice," she began, which I recognized as her diplomatic way of introducing criticism. "Stable, successful, well-mannered. But are you sure he's really the right fit for you?" I felt my defenses rise immediately. "What do you mean?" "Marcus is wonderful. We're happy together." "I'm not questioning his character," she said carefully. "I'm questioning whether you two are truly compatible long-term. You're so quiet and serious, Sophia. You spend all your time working or hiking alone. Marcus seems like he would enjoy a more social lifestyle, someone who could match his energy and ambition." The conversation continued for over an hour, with my mother planting subtle seeds of doubt about my relationship. She questioned whether I was holding Marcus back from his full potential, whether someone as successful as him would eventually want a partner who was more outgoing and socially skilled. She never directly said I wasn't good enough for him, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Despite my mother's concerns, Marcus and I continued to grow closer. We moved in together after 10 months, finding a beautiful apartment with large windows that showcased my design work and provided him with space for his home office. We adopted a routine of morning coffee together before work and evening walks around the neighborhood. On weekends, we explored farmers markets, tried new restaurants, and took hiking trips to various parts of Oregon and Washington. Marcus proposed on a crisp October morning during a hike to Multnomah Falls. He had hidden the ring in his backpack for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. When he dropped to one knee beside the rushing water, telling me that he wanted to spend his life making me happy, I felt like every good thing I had ever hoped for was finally coming true. The ring was perfect, a vintage-style setting with a round diamond that caught the light beautifully. More importantly, Marcus had clearly put thought into choosing something that reflected my taste, rather than simply buying the most expensive option. He had noticed my preference for classic, understated jewelry, and had worked with a local artisan to create something unique. We called our families immediately after the proposal. My mother's reaction was enthusiastic but felt somehow hollow, as if she was performing the role of excited future mother-in-law rather than genuinely celebrating our happiness. She immediately began asking about wedding dates, guest lists, and venue options, taking control of the conversation in her typical fashion. Marcus's parents were thrilled, particularly his mother, who video called us from Vancouver to express her excitement about gaining a daughter-in-law. His father sent a heartfelt email welcoming me to the family and offering to help with wedding planning in any way possible. The contrast between their authentic warmth and my mother's calculated enthusiasm was stark. We began planning our wedding for the following September, giving ourselves nearly a year to organize everything properly. I had always envisioned a small, intimate ceremony in the Columbia River Gorge, surrounded by the natural beauty that had brought Marcus and me together. We found a perfect venue at a historic lodge overlooking the river, with space for about 80 guests. The planning process revealed more about our compatibility. Marcus was wonderfully supportive of my vision, while contributing practical ideas about logistics and budget management. We worked together seamlessly, making decisions through discussion and compromise rather than conflict. Even when we disagreed about details like the music or menu choices, we found solutions that satisfied both of us. My mother, however, had different ideas about how our wedding should unfold. She pushed for a larger guest list, arguing that we needed to invite distant relatives and family friends who had known us for years. She criticized our choice of venue as too casual, suggesting instead that we consider the country club where she held her real estate company's annual events. She wanted us to hire her preferred vendors, use her recommended photographer, and allow her to coordinate many of the details. Each conversation about wedding planning became a negotiation, with my mother presenting her suggestions as necessary considerations rather than personal preferences. She had a talent for making me feel naive and unprepared, as if my ideas were romantic fantasies that wouldn't work in the real world. Marcus remained diplomatically supportive of whatever would make me happy, but I could see the strain that the constant family input was creating. The situation became more complicated when Isabella announced that she was moving back to Oregon. Her company was relocating her to their Portland office, and she would be living just 2 hours away from both Marcus and me. My mother was thrilled, immediately suggesting that Isabella should be heavily involved in our wedding planning since she had experience with event coordination through her work. I felt conflicted about Isabella's return. Part of me hoped that as adults we might finally develop a genuine relationship without our mothers, competitive interference. But another part of me worried that her presence would complicate my life in ways I wasn't prepared to handle, especially during the already stressful process of planning a wedding. Isabella's first visit after her relocation was for Christmas dinner at my mother's house. She arrived looking stunning as always, wearing a designer dress that perfectly showcased her figure and carrying expensive gifts for everyone. She had grown even more polished during her years away, developing the kind of sophisticated confidence that came from success and travel. Marcus was polite and friendly toward Isabella, the same way he was with all my family members. He asked about her work, complimented her on her recent promotion, and listened attentively when she told stories about her travels. I watched their interaction carefully, looking for any signs of unusual attraction or chemistry, but saw nothing beyond normal social courtesy. Isabella, however, seemed particularly interested in Marcus. She asked detailed questions about his work, his hobbies, his background. She complimented his sense of humor and his thoughtfulness, making comments about how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful partner. Her attention felt excessive but not obviously inappropriate, leaving me uncertain whether my discomfort was justified or simply the result of old insecurities. After dinner, my mother suggested that Isabella should help with our wedding planning, since she had professional experience with event coordination and would be living nearby. Before I could object, Isabella enthusiastically agreed, offering to help with vendor research, timeline coordination, and day of logistics. Marcus thought it was a generous offer and encouraged me to accept the help. Looking back now, I realized that Christmas dinner was when the plan began to take shape. At the time, I attributed my uneasiness to family dynamics and pre-wedding stress. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that my mother's history of favoritism toward Isabella was making me see threats where none existed. But something had shifted that evening. The way Isabella looked at Marcus when she thought no one was watching, the way my mother's eyes moved between them during conversations, the way they both seemed to assess him as if he were a prize to be won, rather than a person already committed to someone else. Over the following months, Isabella became increasingly involved in our wedding preparations. She attended vendor meetings, offered opinions on decorations and flowers, and even suggested changes to our ceremony timeline. She was helpful and knowledgeable, but her presence made me feel like a guest at my own wedding planning sessions. Marcus appreciated her assistance, especially when it came to managing the more complex logistics. Isabella had a talent for organization and negotiation that made many tasks easier. She secured better prices from vendors, coordinated delivery schedules, and handled dozens of small details that might have otherwise fallen to me. On paper, her involvement was nothing but beneficial. But I began noticing subtle changes in the dynamic between Isabella and Marcus. They developed inside jokes about wedding planning stress. They exchanged text messages about vendor questions and timeline adjustments. They seemed to enjoy each other's company in a way that felt different from mere family courtesy or practical collaboration. When I expressed concern to Marcus, he dismissed my worries as pre-wedding jitters. Isabella was just being helpful, he said. She was good at event planning and genuinely wanted our day to be perfect. He couldn't understand why I would be uncomfortable with assistance from someone who clearly cared about our happiness. My mother reinforced this narrative whenever I brought up my concerns. She accused me of being ungrateful for Isabella's generous help, and suggested that my anxiety about the wedding was making me paranoid about innocent interactions. She reminded me that Isabella had always been supportive of my relationships, and would never do anything to hurt me. The gaslighting was subtle but effective. I began questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was creating problems where none existed. My natural tendency toward anxiety and overthinking made it easy to dismiss my instincts as neurotic rather than protective. Spring arrived with our wedding just 5 months away. The major planning was nearly complete, with most vendors booked and details finalized. Marcus and I should have been excited about our approaching marriage, but I felt increasingly disconnected from the process and uncertain about my own feelings. Isabella had become a constant presence in our lives. She joined us for dinner at least once a week, often bringing wine and staying late to discuss wedding details or simply socialize. She remembered Marcus's preferences and interests with remarkable accuracy, bringing him books about sustainable architecture or articles about engineering innovations she thought he would find interesting. Their friendship appeared genuine and innocent, but something about it troubled me in ways I couldn't articulate. Isabella had a way of making herself indispensable while simultaneously making me feel unnecessary. She anticipated Marcus's needs and preferences better than I did. She made him laugh more easily. She seemed to energize him in ways that my quieter personality never could. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mother grew increasingly strained. She criticized my wedding decisions more frequently, often in front of Marcus and Isabella. She questioned my choice of dress, my preference for simple decorations, my desire for a small guest list. She made me feel like I was disappointing everyone with my lack of enthusiasm for elaborate celebrations. The breaking point came during a dinner at my mother's house in early May. We were finalizing the last details of the reception timeline when my mother announced that she had invited additional guests without consulting me. 20 more people, mostly her friends and colleagues, would be attending our intimate wedding. I objected strongly, explaining that we had specifically planned for a small gathering, and that additional guests would change the entire atmosphere of the event. My mother dismissed my concerns, saying that these people had known me since childhood and would be hurt if they weren't included. She accused me of being selfish and antisocial, suggesting that my reluctance to celebrate properly reflected poorly on our families. Marcus tried to mediate, suggesting that we could accommodate the additional guests with some adjustments to the seating arrangements. Isabella agreed, offering to handle the logistics of the expanded guest list. I felt outnumbered and overwhelmed, as if my own wedding was being taken away from me piece by piece. That night, I lay awake beside Marcus, trying to understand why I felt so disconnected from what should have been the happiest time of my life. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The wedding would be beautiful. Marcus loved me and was excited about our future together. My family was involved and supportive. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong in ways I couldn't identify or explain. I began to notice that Marcus seemed more relaxed and animated when Isabella was around. He laughed more easily at her jokes, engaged more enthusiastically in conversations about topics she raised, and appeared genuinely pleased by her attention and approval. When it was just the two of us, he was loving but seemed somehow subdued, as if he was performing the role of devoted fiancé rather than living it authentically. My work began to suffer as wedding stress and family tension consumed more of my mental energy. I missed deadlines on freelance projects and found it difficult to concentrate on creative tasks. My supervisor at the marketing agency noticed my distraction and suggested that I consider taking time off to focus on my personal life. The suggestion that I needed time off to handle my own wedding felt like another indication that I was failing to manage my life properly. Isabella worked full-time while helping plan my wedding, maintaining her social life, and pursuing a long-distance relationship with a successful attorney she had met during a business trip. She made everything look effortless while I struggled with the most basic aspects of my own life. 3 weeks before our wedding, Isabella threw me a bridal shower that I had never asked for and didn't particularly want. She organized it at an upscale restaurant in downtown Portland, inviting 30 women including family members, co-workers, and friends I hadn't spoken to in years. The event was elegant and well-planned, with beautiful decorations and thoughtful details. But sitting at the head table, opening gifts while everyone watched and commented, I felt like I was playing a role in someone else's story. The celebration felt hollow, as if we were all pretending that this was what I wanted, rather than what Isabella and my mother had decided I should want. During the gift opening portion of the shower, my mother stood up to make a speech about how proud she was of the woman I had become, and how excited she was about my future with Marcus. She talked about the importance of family support during major life transitions and thanked Isabella for all her help in making the wedding planning process so smooth. Then Isabella stood up to speak, and something in her tone made me pay closer attention. She talked about how much Marcus meant to our family, how perfect he was for someone in our family, how lucky we all were to have him joining us. Her phrasing was subtle but strange, referring to Marcus as someone who belonged with our family rather than specifically with me. I looked around the room and saw women nodding in agreement, smiling at Isabella's apparent devotion to my happiness. But her words felt like they contained a message I wasn't quite catching, a subtext that was being communicated to everyone except me. That evening, I called my best friend Sarah, who had been my roommate in college and remained my closest confidant despite living in San Francisco. I tried to explain my growing uneasiness about the wedding planning and my family's involvement, but even to myself, my concerns sounded petty and neurotic. Sarah listened patiently as I described my interactions with Isabella and my mother's increasing criticism of my choices. She pointed out that wedding planning was notoriously stressful, and that family dynamics often became amplified during major events. She suggested that I was probably overthinking normal tensions that would resolve themselves after the wedding. But then Sarah asked a question that stopped me cold. "Sophia, do you actually want to marry Marcus? Or do you feel like you should want to marry him?" I couldn't answer immediately. The question touched on something I had been avoiding acknowledging, even to myself. I loved Marcus, but I wasn't sure whether I was in love with him or simply in love with the idea of being chosen by someone like him. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner, but our relationship had begun to feel more like a successful collaboration than a passionate romance. More troubling was the realization that I felt more nervous about disappointing my family by calling off the wedding than I felt excited about actually marrying Marcus. The thought of facing my mother's reaction to a canceled engagement was more terrifying than the prospect of spending my life with someone I wasn't sure I truly belonged with. 2 weeks before the wedding, Marcus suggested that we spend a weekend away together, just the two of us, to reconnect and relax before the final push of preparations. We drove to the Oregon coast and stayed at a small bed and breakfast overlooking the ocean. It should have been romantic and rejuvenating, but instead it felt forced and awkward. We walked on the beach, ate dinner at seaside restaurants, and talked about our future plans. Marcus was attentive and affectionate, but something felt mechanical about our interactions. We were going through the motions of a couple in love, without the underlying passion that should have driven those motions. On Saturday night, as we sat on our room's balcony listening to the waves, Marcus brought up Isabella. He mentioned how grateful he was for all her help with the wedding planning, and how much he enjoyed her company. He said that he felt lucky to be gaining not just a wife but a whole family of people who cared about him. His comments were innocent enough, but something in his tone caught my attention. He talked about Isabella with a warmth and enthusiasm that felt different from how he talked about other family members. He described her as brilliant, funny, and incredibly capable, using superlatives that he rarely applied to anyone. I asked him directly if he found Isabella attractive, trying to make the question sound casual and teasing. He laughed and said that of course she was attractive, but that he was completely committed to me and would never do anything to jeopardize our relationship. His answer was exactly what I wanted to hear, but it didn't ease my underlying concerns. That weekend trip marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Marcus and I returned home with our relationship feeling more strained than before, despite our efforts to reconnect. The wedding preparations continued, but my enthusiasm had completely disappeared. 1 week before our wedding, my mother called an emergency family meeting. She said there were important details to finalize, and that everyone needed to be present to ensure everything went smoothly. Marcus, Isabella, Daniel, and I gathered at her house on a Thursday evening for what I assumed would be a final planning session. Instead, my mother announced that she had something difficult to tell me. She said that over the past few months, she had become concerned about my readiness for marriage. She had noticed my anxiety, my resistance to family input, and my general lack of enthusiasm for the wedding planning process. More importantly, she said, she had noticed that Marcus and Isabella had developed a deep connection during their time working together on the wedding plans. They shared interests, values, and personalities in a way that she had never seen between Marcus and me. She believed that they were better suited for each other, and that I was holding Marcus back from true happiness. The room fell silent as her words sank in. I looked at Marcus, expecting him to immediately reject this absurd suggestion and defend our relationship. Instead, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, as if he was considering possibilities he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. Isabella sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, but I caught a glimpse of something in her expression that looked like anticipation rather than shock. Daniel appeared as surprised as I was, but he remained silent, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. My mother continued talking, explaining that she thought it would be better for everyone if Marcus and Isabella explored their connection rather than proceeding with a wedding that might lead to unhappiness for all involved. She suggested that true love required honesty about feelings, even when those feelings were inconvenient or painful. I felt like I was listening to someone describe my life from an alternate universe. The woman who had raised me was calmly suggesting that my fiancé should pursue my cousin instead of marrying me, presenting this betrayal as if it were a reasonable solution to a complex problem. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. He said that he had developed feelings for Isabella over the past few months, but had tried to suppress them out of loyalty to me. He claimed that he hadn't acted on these feelings, and wasn't even sure if they were reciprocated, but he admitted that he had begun questioning whether our compatibility was strong enough for a lifetime commitment. Isabella's response was equally devastating. She said that she had fallen in love with Marcus, but had never intended for it to happen. She claimed that she had tried to distance herself from him but found it impossible because of her involvement in our wedding planning. She said that she would rather step away entirely than cause problems for Marcus and me. My mother praised both of them for their honesty and maturity. She said that these kinds of situations were complicated, but that the most important thing was ensuring everyone's long-term happiness. She suggested that Marcus and Isabella should have time to explore their feelings, while I took time to consider whether I really wanted to marry someone who wasn't completely certain about choosing me. I stood up and walked out of the house without saying a word. I drove home in a daze, my mind completely blank except for the sound of my mother's voice explaining why my fiancé should be with my cousin instead of me. I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by wedding gifts and decorations, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus came home around midnight, looking exhausted and defeated. He sat beside me on the couch and tried to explain his feelings, his confusion, his regret about the timing of this revelation. He said that he loved me but wasn't sure if he was in love with me, and that his growing feelings for Isabella had made him question everything about our relationship. He claimed that he had never intended for things to develop this way, and that he was as surprised as anyone by the depth of his connection with Isabella. He said that if I wanted to proceed with the wedding, he would honor his commitment to me and never see Isabella again. But he admitted that he would always wonder about what might have been possible between them. I asked him to leave that night. I needed time to think without his presence clouding my judgment. He packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, promising to give me space to process everything that had happened. For 3 days, I barely left my apartment. I called in sick to work and ignored phone calls from my family. I sat with the reality that my wedding was supposed to happen in 4 days and tried to decide what I wanted to do with that information. On Sunday morning, 3 days before our scheduled wedding, I called Marcus and asked him to meet me at the coffee shop where we had first encountered each other. I told him that I was calling off the wedding, but that I wanted to have one final conversation to understand how we had reached this point. We sat at the same corner table where he had been working on his blueprints 2 years earlier. I asked him to be completely honest about his feelings for Isabella and about his doubts regarding our relationship. I promised that I wouldn't be angry or vindictive, that I simply needed to understand the truth. Marcus admitted that he had been questioning our compatibility for months, long before Isabella became involved in our lives. He said that he loved and respected me, but had begun to realize that we might be better as friends than as romantic partners. He claimed that Isabella's presence had simply clarified feelings he had been trying to ignore. He also revealed that my mother had been encouraging his doubts about our relationship almost from the beginning. She had made comments about my social anxiety, my lack of ambition, my tendency to avoid conflict. She had suggested that he might be settling for someone who couldn't match his energy and goals. Most painfully, he admitted that Isabella understood him in ways that I never had. She shared his social ease, his professional ambitions, his desire for an active social life. She challenged him intellectually and supported his career goals in ways that felt more natural and energizing than my quieter form of support. I listened to his explanations without interrupting, taking in the reality that my relationship had been failing for months without my awareness. I realized that I had been so focused on meeting external expectations for what our relationship should look like, that I had missed the signs that it wasn't working for either of us. When Marcus finished talking, I told him that I appreciated his honesty, and that I didn't want him to marry me out of obligation or guilt. I said that if he had feelings for Isabella, he should explore them without worrying about my reaction. I released him from our engagement and wished him happiness, meaning it more than I expected to. We canceled the wedding that afternoon, making phone calls to vendors and guests to explain that the event would not be taking place. I told people that we had realized we weren't right for each other and had decided to end our engagement amicably. Most people were understanding, though I could hear the curiosity in their voices about what had really happened. My mother was surprisingly supportive of the decision, expressing relief that I had recognized the situation before making a mistake that would have been difficult to undo. She offered to help with cancellation logistics and to handle conversations with relatives who might have questions about the change in plans. Isabella called me that evening to apologize for her role in the situation. She claimed that she had never intended to develop feelings for Marcus and that she would have stepped away if she had realized the impact her presence was having on our relationship. She said that she valued our family relationship too much to pursue anything with Marcus if it would cause lasting damage between us. I told her that I didn't blame her for falling in love with someone who was emotionally available and questioning his commitment to someone else. I said that if she and Marcus wanted to explore a relationship, they had my permission to do so without guilt or secrecy. I meant it at the time, though I would later regret my generosity. The next few weeks passed in a blur of returned gifts, canceled plans, and awkward conversations with friends and family members who had been looking forward to the wedding. I threw myself into work, taking on extra freelance projects to keep my mind occupied and my finances stable after the expensive wedding preparations. Marcus and Isabella waited exactly 2 weeks after our breakup before beginning to date officially. They were discreet about their relationship at first, but it became clear that they were spending significant time together. My mother kept me updated on their developing romance, praising their compatibility and expressing happiness about how well things had worked out for everyone involved. I felt remarkably calm about their relationship during those first few months. I genuinely believed that I had made the right decision in ending my engagement, and that Marcus and Isabella were better suited for each other than Marcus and I had been. I focused on rebuilding my own life and exploring who I was outside of that relationship. I moved to a smaller apartment that I could afford on my own. I adopted a new routine of morning yoga and evening painting classes. I started dating casually, meeting people through friends and online apps without the pressure of finding a serious relationship immediately. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life rather than trying to meet other people's expectations. 6 months after our breakup, my mother casually mentioned that Marcus had proposed to Isabella during a weekend trip to wine country. She described the proposal in detail, emphasizing how romantic and thoughtful it had been. She showed me photos that Isabella had shared, including pictures of the ring, which was noticeably larger and more elaborate than the one Marcus had given me. I felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy or regret, but it passed quickly. I was genuinely happy that they had found each other, even if the circumstances of their meeting had been painful for me. I sent Isabella a congratulatory text message and meant it sincerely. The wedding planning for Marcus and Isabella proceeded much more smoothly than ours had. They chose a venue in Napa Valley, planning an elaborate celebration for 200 guests. Isabella shared details with my mother, who passed them along to me with obvious excitement about the upcoming event. I was invited to the wedding, which was scheduled for the following September, almost exactly 1 year after Marcus and I were supposed to have been married. I declined the invitation politely, explaining that I thought my presence might make the day awkward for everyone involved. Isabella accepted my decision gracefully, saying that she understood and hoped we could celebrate together at a different time. As their wedding date approached, I realized that I was completely at peace with how everything had unfolded. Marcus and Isabella seemed genuinely happy together. Their relationship progressed naturally through milestones, like moving in together, meeting extended family members, and making future plans. They appeared to bring out the best in each other in ways that Marcus and I never had. I continued building my own life, eventually landing a promotion at work that gave me more creative control over projects. I started a small side business, designing logos and marketing materials for local nonprofits. I began dating someone new, a photographer named Jake who shared my love of hiking and quiet evenings at home. Everything seemed to be working out exactly as it should have. I had escaped a marriage that wouldn't have made either Marcus or me truly happy. He had found someone who was perfect for him. I was discovering my own path and building relationships based on genuine compatibility, rather than external expectations. Then, 3 months ago, everything I thought I knew about the situation was turned upside down by a set of wedding photos that appeared in my social media feed. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in February when I was scrolling through Instagram, mindlessly browsing through posts from friends and acquaintances while eating leftover Thai food on my couch. Luna was curled up beside me, purring contentedly as I absently scratched behind her ears. I had just finished a successful presentation for a new client and was feeling particularly good about my career progress when Isabella's name appeared at the top of my suggested posts. I almost scrolled past without looking, as I had been doing for months whenever her content appeared. But something made me pause and tap on her profile. Maybe it was curiosity about how married life was treating her, or perhaps just the masochistic impulse that sometimes drives us to examine things we know will hurt us. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. The first photo showed Isabella in a stunning white wedding dress, standing beside Marcus in a black tuxedo. They were kissing under an elaborate floral arch, surrounded by what looked like hundreds of guests. The setting was clearly expensive and luxurious, with crystal chandeliers and gold accents visible in the background. The caption read, "Best day of my life. Married to my soulmate at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay." But it was the date stamp that made my hands start shaking. The wedding had taken place in November, just 2 months after Marcus and I were supposed to have been married, and only 4 months after their engagement. They had planned and executed an elaborate wedding in a time frame that should have been impossible. I scrolled through more photos with growing disbelief and horror. There was my mother, tears streaming down her face as she walked Isabella down the aisle. There was Daniel, my own brother, serving as one of Marcus's groomsmen. There were relatives I recognized, family friends who had known me since childhood, all celebrating this union with obvious joy and excitement. In photo after photo, I saw people who had been invited to my canceled wedding now celebrating Isabella and Marcus with even more enthusiasm than they had shown for our planned event. The guest list was enormous, far larger than the intimate gathering Marcus and I had envisioned. These people had not just attended their wedding, they had participated in an elaborate celebration that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. But the most devastating photo was one showing the wedding party posed on the steps of the venue. Isabella stood radiant in the center, surrounded by 6 bridesmaids in dusty rose dresses. Beside Marcus stood his groomsmen, including several men I recognized as his college friends and co-workers. And there, standing proudly as the best man, was my uncle Roberto, my mother's brother who had supposedly been too busy with work to attend my canceled wedding. The timeline made no sense. Marcus and Isabella had only started dating officially 4 months before this wedding. Even if they had been planning it secretly during our engagement, the logistics of organizing such an elaborate event should have taken at least a year. The venue alone would have required booking far in advance, especially at a luxury resort like the Ritz-Carlton. I continued scrolling through the photos, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. There were pictures from what appeared to be an engagement party I had never heard about, hosted at an elegant restaurant with dozens of guests. The date stamp showed it had taken place just 3 weeks after Marcus and I officially broke up, which meant they must have been planning it while we were still together. There were photos from Isabella's bachelorette party in Las Vegas, a lavish weekend celebration with 12 of her friends. The images showed private cabanas at pool parties, VIP treatment at exclusive clubs, and shopping expeditions at high-end boutiques. This wasn't the modest celebration of someone who had unexpectedly fallen in love and decided to marry quickly. This was the carefully orchestrated celebration of someone who had been planning a wedding for months. The bridal shower photos were equally revealing. Isabella had apparently had 2 separate celebrations, one in Sacramento with her mother's friends and family, and another in Portland with my mother's social circle. I recognized many of the faces from my own canceled bridal shower, the same women who had celebrated my upcoming marriage just months earlier. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold my phone. I screenshotted photo after photo, building a collection of evidence that something far more calculated and cruel had taken place than I had ever imagined. This wasn't a case of 2 people falling unexpectedly in love and following their hearts. This was a systematic deception that had been planned and executed over many months, possibly even before Marcus and I had gotten engaged. The wedding photographer's watermark led me to their professional website, where I found even more photos from Marcus and Isabella's celebration. The gallery showed the entire day in chronological order, from the morning preparations through the late-night reception. The level of detail and coordination was staggering. Isabella had apparently changed into 3 different dresses throughout the day. The floral arrangements were elaborate and clearly expensive. The band was a well-known group that would have required booking far in advance. But it was the candid shots that revealed the most damaging information. In the background of several photos, I could see planning documents and timelines spread across tables. One image, clearly taken during the reception setup, showed a wedding planning binder that appeared to be thick, with months of accumulated details and contracts. I spent the next several hours examining every photo I could find, cross-referencing dates, and looking for additional clues about the timeline of their relationship. What I discovered painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive and calculated that it took my breath away. Isabella's social media history, which I accessed through mutual friends' accounts, showed that she had been posting photos with Marcus as early as 6 months before our wedding was supposed to take place. They were always in group settings or at family gatherings, so I had dismissed them as normal family interactions when I had seen them originally. But looking at them now with fresh eyes, I could see the body language and facial expressions that suggested a much deeper connection than cousin-in-law relationships typically involved. There were photos from hiking trips that Marcus had told me were solo expeditions to clear his head during stressful periods at work. There were pictures from restaurants I recognized as places he had claimed to be dining with work colleagues. There were images from wine tastings and cultural events that he had said he was attending with his engineering firm's social group. Marcus had been living a double life for months before our breakup, spending time with Isabella while maintaining the pretense of a committed relationship with me. Even worse, my own family had been facilitating and covering for their deception, creating alibis and explanations that allowed them to spend time together without arousing my suspicion. The most damaging evidence came from the engagement announcement that had been published in the Sacramento Bee newspaper. The article included details about how Marcus and Isabella had met, describing it as a chance encounter at a professional networking event in San Francisco 2 years earlier. According to the story, they had maintained a friendship while he was engaged to someone else, but had realized their true feelings for each other after his previous engagement ended. The timeline in this article was completely different from what they had told me and our families. According to this version, Marcus and Isabella had known each other and been building a relationship for the entire duration of his engagement to me. They had been planning their future together while Marcus was wearing my ring and planning our wedding. I called Sarah immediately, despite the late hour and the time difference that made it past midnight in San Francisco. She answered on the first ring, immediately sensing the distress in my voice when I said hello. "Sophia, what's wrong?" "You sound terrible." I tried to explain what I had discovered, sending her screenshots of the wedding photos and the newspaper announcement while we talked. She was initially skeptical, suggesting that I might be misinterpreting innocent interactions or reading too much into coincidental timing. But as I walked her through the evidence systematically, pointing out the inconsistencies and impossibilities in the timeline I had been given, her tone changed from skeptical to horrified. "This is insane," she said after I had finished explaining everything I had found. "You're telling me that they planned this entire wedding in secret while you were still engaged to him? And your own mother was helping them do it?" "It's worse than that," I replied, my voice hollow with the realization of how thoroughly I had been deceived. "I think they were planning it before Marcus even proposed to me. Some of these vendor contracts and venue bookings would have required deposits and signatures months in advance. They weren't falling in love during our wedding planning. They were using our wedding planning as cover to organize their own celebration." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I was telling her. "What are you going to do with this information?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. I was still trying to wrap my mind around the scope of the deception that had been perpetrated against me. My entire family had participated in a conspiracy to steal my fiancé and gaslight me into believing that their betrayal was somehow in my best interest. They had spent months lying to my face while secretly planning the wedding that should have been mine. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to confront them with the evidence and demand an explanation. But another part of me wonders what the point would be. They already got what they wanted. Marcus and Isabella are married. My mother has the daughter-in-law she always preferred. Exposing their deception won't change any of that. But it might prevent them from doing something like this to someone else," Sarah pointed out. "And more importantly, you deserve to know the truth about what happened to your life. You spent months thinking you were crazy for noticing problems in your relationship. You blamed yourself for not being good enough to keep Marcus interested. You need to know that none of that was your fault." She was right, but the thought of confronting my family with evidence of their betrayal felt overwhelming. These were people who had raised me, who I had trusted with my deepest vulnerabilities and fears. Learning that they had conspired against me so thoroughly was almost impossible to accept, even with photographic evidence. I spent the rest of that night researching everything I could find about Marcus and Isabella's relationship timeline. I created a detailed document with dates, photos, and contradictions in their story. I reached out to mutual friends and acquaintances, asking casual questions about when they had first noticed Marcus and Isabella together, or when they had heard about their engagement. What I learned over the following days painted an even more disturbing picture. Several people mentioned seeing Marcus and Isabella together at events and locations, months before they had supposedly started dating. A coworker of Isabella's mentioned that she had been planning a big event as early as the previous summer, showing her wedding dress inspiration photos and asking for vacation time for her honeymoon. Marcus's college roommate, when I reached out to ask about his role as a groomsman, accidentally revealed that he had been asked to save the date for the wedding back in July, just 1 month after my engagement had ended. He quickly corrected himself when he realized his mistake, but the damage was done. They had been sending save-the-date notices for their wedding while I was still processing the end of my relationship with Marcus. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Marcus and Isabella had been planning their wedding for at least 6 months before my engagement officially ended, possibly longer. My mother had been actively facilitating their relationship while undermining mine. My entire family had participated in a conspiracy that had lasted for months, lying to me consistently while pretending to support my happiness and well-being. But the most devastating realization was that my original instincts had been completely correct. Every concern I had raised about Marcus and Isabella's relationship, every moment of uneasiness I had felt about their interactions, every suspicion about my mother's motives had been accurate. I had been gaslit so effectively that I had dismissed my own perceptions and blamed myself for being paranoid and insecure. A week after discovering the wedding photos, I made the decision to confront my mother directly. I couldn't continue living with the knowledge of what had happened without giving her an opportunity to explain herself. I owed it to our relationship, damaged as it was, to hear her side of the story before deciding how to proceed. I drove to Salem on a Saturday morning, bringing printed copies of the most damaging photos and timeline evidence. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, trying to prepare for various reactions she might have. I expected denial, or anger, or perhaps even remorse if she realized how thoroughly her deception had been exposed. What I didn't expect was the complete lack of surprise or shame she displayed when I confronted her with the evidence. My mother was in her garden when I arrived, pruning roses and humming to herself. She looked up with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw the expression on my face and the folder of documents in my hands. "Sophia, what a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting you today." "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "About Marcus and Isabella's wedding. About how long you've been lying to me." Her face went carefully neutral, the expression she wore when she was calculating her next move in a difficult negotiation. She set down her pruning shears and gestured toward the patio table where we had sat for so many difficult conversations over the years. "I see you've been doing some research," she said, noting the folder I carried. I suppose this conversation was inevitable eventually. I spread the photos across the table systematically, laying out the evidence like a prosecutor presenting a case. The wedding photos, the engagement announcement, the timeline inconsistencies, the vendor contracts that would have required advance booking. I explained what I had discovered about their relationship history and the impossibility of their official story. My mother examined each piece of evidence calmly, without the shock or denial I had expected. When I finished my presentation, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with something that might have been pride in her eyes. "You've done very thorough work," she said. "I always knew you were smarter than you gave yourself credit for. I wondered how long it would take you to figure out what really happened." Her casual tone and lack of defensiveness caught me completely off guard. I had been prepared for lies, arguments, or emotional manipulation. I wasn't prepared for what sounded almost like congratulations on solving a puzzle she had created. "So you admit it?" I asked. "You admit that you helped them plan their wedding while I was still engaged to Marcus? That you lied to me for months while conspiring to steal my fiancé?" "I wouldn't use those words," she replied, her voice taking on the patient tone she had always used when explaining complex adult concepts to me as a child. "I helped facilitate a relationship between two people who were obviously perfect for each other. I prevented you from making a mistake that would have made everyone miserable in the long run." The casual way she dismissed my feelings and agency was breathtaking in its cruelty. She wasn't denying what she had done. She was reframing it as a favor she had done for me. "Marcus was never really yours, Sophia," she continued, her voice gentle but implacable. "He was settling for you because you were safe and undemanding. But anyone could see that he came alive around Isabella in a way he never did with you. They have the kind of connection that happens once in a lifetime." I wasn't going to let you destroy that out of selfishness or insecurity. I felt like I was hearing my mother speak clearly for the first time in my life. The manipulation and gaslighting that had characterized so many of our interactions was gone, replaced by a brutal honesty that was somehow even more devastating. Besides, she added, reaching across the table to touch my hand in a gesture that felt like mockery, look how well everything worked out. Marcus and Isabella are blissfully happy. You've built a successful career and found someone who actually appreciates your personality. Everyone got what they really needed. I pulled my hand away from hers, struggling to process the magnitude of her betrayal and the complete lack of remorse she was displaying. You had no right to make that decision for me, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You had no right to manipulate my relationship or lie to me for months. You destroyed my ability to trust my own perceptions and made me question my sanity. I did what any good mother would do, she replied firmly. I protected my daughter from making a decision that would have ruined multiple lives. Marcus would have been miserable married to you, spending his life wishing he had been brave enough to choose Isabella. You would have been miserable married to someone who didn't truly appreciate you. Isabella would have been heartbroken, watching the love of her life marry someone else out of obligation. The conversation continued for another hour, with my mother systematically defending every aspect of the deception. She had convinced herself that orchestrating the betrayal of my engagement was an act of maternal love and wisdom. She genuinely believed that she had saved everyone from unhappiness by ensuring that Marcus and Isabella ended up together. She revealed details that made the conspiracy even more extensive than I had realized. She had been encouraging Marcus's doubts about our relationship almost from the day we met, making subtle comments about our incompatibility and my limitations as a partner. She had arranged opportunities for him and Isabella to spend time together, creating excuses for her to visit during periods when Marcus was at the house. Most damaging, she admitted that she had been sharing private information about my relationship with Isabella, giving her insights into Marcus's concerns and desires that allowed her to position herself as the perfect alternative to me. Every intimate conversation I had had with my mother about my relationship struggles had been ammunition she provided to Isabella in her campaign to win Marcus away from me. You want to know the truth? My mother said as our conversation began winding down. Isabella called me 3 months after she moved back to Oregon. She told me she had feelings for Marcus and asked for my help in winning him away from you. I could have discouraged her, could have insisted that she respect your relationship and find someone else. But I looked at the situation objectively and realized she was right. They belonged together, and you were the only thing standing in the way of their happiness. The revelation that Isabella had actively recruited my mother as an accomplice in stealing my fiancé was the final piece of the puzzle. This hadn't been a case of unexpected attraction or irresistible chemistry. It had been a calculated campaign to destroy my relationship and replace me in Marcus's life. You need to understand something, Sophia, my mother continued, her voice taking on the lecturing tone I remembered from childhood. Isabella has always been everything you're not. She's confident, social, ambitious, beautiful. Men like Marcus need partners who can match their energy and support their goals. You would have held him back with your anxiety and your need for quiet, simple life. Isabella pushes him to be his best self. Each word felt like a physical blow, not because I believed what she was saying about my inadequacies, but because I was finally hearing the true thoughts and feelings my mother had been hiding behind years of superficial support and encouragement. I stood up to leave, gathering the photos and documents that had become evidence of the most profound betrayal I had ever experienced. My mother remained seated, watching me with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully completed a difficult but necessary task. Where do we go from here? She asked as I reached the garden gate. Are you planning to cause problems for Marcus and Isabella? Because I should warn you that they're prepared to take legal action if you try to interfere with their marriage, or spread malicious rumors about how it came about. The threat was delivered with the same casual tone she had used to describe her role in destroying my engagement. Even now, she was more concerned about protecting Isabella and Marcus from the consequences of their deception than she was about repairing her relationship with me. I don't want anything from them, I replied, my voice hollow with exhaustion and grief. They can keep their marriage and their lies. But I want nothing more to do with any of you. Don't contact me, don't visit me, don't involve me in family events. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a mother. I drove home in a state of emotional numbness that lasted for several days. The conversation with my mother had confirmed everything I had suspected and more, but it had also destroyed the last remnants of hope I had harbored that our relationship might be salvageable. Learning that she had actively conspired against my happiness while pretending to love and support me was a betrayal so fundamental that it called into question everything I thought I knew about my own life. Over the following weeks, I began the process of cutting ties with my family entirely. I blocked my mother's phone number and social media accounts. I sent a message to Daniel explaining that I needed space from the family and wouldn't be attending future gatherings or celebrations. I changed my emergency contacts at work and updated my medical information to remove family members. The hardest part was accepting that I had lost not just my mother and cousin, but my entire extended family support system. Elena, Isabella's mother, had obviously been part of the conspiracy. Uncle Roberto had chosen to serve as Marcus's best man, despite knowing the truth about their relationship timeline. Daniel had participated in their wedding while knowing that I had been deceived about the circumstances of my breakup. I also had to confront the reality that Marcus had never loved me the way I thought he had. Our entire relationship had been built on deception, with him maintaining a connection to Isabella while pretending to be committed to me. The man I had planned to marry had been living a lie for months, possibly years, pretending to love me while actively pursuing someone else. But perhaps the most difficult realization was that I had been right about everything from the beginning. Every instinct that told me something was wrong, every concern about Isabella's involvement in our lives, every suspicion about my mother's motives had been accurate. I had been gaslit so effectively that I had dismissed my own perceptions and blamed myself for being paranoid. The process of rebuilding my life without my family support system was challenging, but ultimately liberating. I threw myself into my work with renewed energy, taking on ambitious projects that stretched my creative abilities. I strengthened my friendship with Sarah and began building new relationships with people who appreciated my personality rather than trying to change it. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. The experience of having my perceptions validated, after months of being told I was imagining problems, taught me to value my own judgment over other people's reassurances. I would never again dismiss my concerns, simply because someone else insisted they were unfounded. 3 months after confronting my mother, I received a text message from Isabella. It was the first contact I had heard from her since our conversation about declining their wedding invitation. The message was brief but loaded with implications that made my blood run cold all over again. Sophia, I heard about your conversation with Aunt Catherine. I think there are some things you still don't understand about what really happened. If you want the complete truth, we should talk. There's more to the story than you know. Isabella's message sat on my phone for 3 days before I responded. I stared at those words countless times, trying to decode what additional secrets she could possibly be hiding. What more could there be beyond the systematic deception I had already uncovered? How much deeper could this betrayal possibly go? But curiosity eventually won over my desire to leave the past buried. I needed to know what she meant by the complete truth, and what part of the story I was supposedly still missing. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a small cafe in downtown Portland that neither of us had any personal history with. Isabella arrived 15 minutes late, looking as polished and confident as ever, despite the circumstances. She wore a cream-colored blazer and dark jeans, her hair styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. Her wedding ring caught the light as she gestured for the server, a constant reminder of what she had gained through her deception. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down across from me, her voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify. "I wasn't sure you would want to hear what I have to say." "I'm here," I replied simply. "So talk." Isabella ordered a green tea and spent several minutes adding honey and stirring, clearly buying time to organize her thoughts. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was more serious than I had ever seen it. Everything you discovered about the timeline is true, she began. Marcus and I were planning our wedding while you were still engaged to him. Your mother was helping us coordinate everything. We lied to you consistently for months, and we gaslit you into believing your instincts were wrong. Her admission was so straightforward that it caught me off guard. I had expected denials, justifications, or emotional manipulation. Instead, she was confirming my worst discoveries with matter-of-fact directness. But what you don't know, she continued, is that none of it was real. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. What do you mean none of it was real? Isabella took a deep breath, her hands wrapped around her teacup, as if seeking warmth. Marcus never loved me. I was never in love with him. Our entire relationship was a business arrangement designed to achieve specific goals for specific people. The words hung in the air between us, so unexpected that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. Isabella continued talking, her voice growing more strained with each revelation. It started exactly the way I told your mother. I moved back to Oregon and noticed how successful and stable Marcus was. But I wasn't interested in him romantically. I was interested in what a relationship with him could provide for me. She explained that her job with the luxury resort chain was ending due to company downsizing. She was facing the prospect of unemployment in an expensive city with significant credit card debt from maintaining the lifestyle her position had required. She needed a solution that would provide financial security without requiring her to start over in a new career. I approached your mother with a proposition, Isabella continued. I suggested that if she could help me win Marcus away from you, I would ensure that she got the daughter-in-law she actually wanted. Someone who would defer to her judgment, include her in decisions, and give her the social status she felt she deserved. My mother had apparently been frustrated with my independence and my tendency to make decisions without consulting her. She resented that Marcus and I planned our wedding according to our own preferences, rather than accepting her input as authority. She wanted a daughter-in-law who would treat her as the matriarch of the family and defer to her wishes in important matters. The deal was simple, Isabella said. I would marry Marcus and give your mother the respectful, obedient daughter-in-law she wanted. In exchange, she would help me secure the financial stability that marriage to a successful engineer would provide. We both got what we needed. But the arrangement went deeper than I had imagined. Isabella revealed that my mother had been paying her a monthly stipend throughout the entire process, covering her living expenses while she worked to seduce Marcus away from me. The money came from my mother's real estate commissions, effectively meaning that she had been investing her income in destroying my relationship. Marcus was never supposed to find out it was all calculated, Isabella continued. The plan was for me to gradually make him genuinely fall in love with me over time. Your mother thought that once we were married and settled, real feelings would develop naturally. I felt sick as I listened to her describe the cold-blooded nature of their conspiracy. They had treated my fiancé like a prize to be won and my emotions like obstacles to be overcome. The entire situation had been orchestrated like a business merger rather than a matter of human hearts and relationships. But it didn't work out that way, Isabella said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Marcus never really got over you. Even after we were married, he would talk about you constantly. He would compare everything I did to how you would have handled situations. He kept photos of you on his phone and would look at them when he thought I wasn't watching. The revelation that Marcus had been struggling with our breakup was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that our relationship had been real for him, even if he had been manipulated into questioning it. But it also meant that his marriage to Isabella was built on regret and longing rather than love. The wedding was beautiful, Isabella continued, but our marriage has been a disaster almost from the beginning. Marcus is miserable, and he makes sure I know it. He's cold, distant, and resentful. He goes through the motions of being a husband, but there's no warmth or genuine affection between us. She described a marriage that sounded more like a prison sentence than a partnership. Marcus fulfilled his obligations as a husband but showed no interest in building a real relationship with her. He worked long hours to avoid being home, spent weekends on solo hiking trips, and barely spoke to her beyond necessary household communications. Your mother keeps insisting that he just needs more time to adjust, that eventually he'll appreciate what he has with me. But it's been over a year, and things are getting worse, not better. He's started talking about divorce. The irony of the situation was staggering. Isabella had destroyed my relationship to gain financial security and social status. But she had ended up trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who resented her presence in his life. My mother had orchestrated the entire scheme to get the daughter-in-law she wanted, but she had ended up with a son-in-law who despised her for her manipulation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What do you expect me to do with this information?" Isabella's composure finally cracked, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Because I need your help. Marcus is planning to file for divorce, and your mother is threatening to destroy my reputation if I don't find a way to save the marriage. She says she'll tell everyone that I seduced him away from you through manipulation and lies." The desperate edge in her voice revealed the true purpose of this meeting. Isabella wasn't confessing out of guilt or remorse. She was trying to recruit me as an ally in salvaging the situation she had created. She wanted me to intervene with Marcus, to somehow convince him to give their marriage a genuine chance. "She'll ruin me," Isabella continued, her voice breaking. "She has evidence of all the money she paid me, records of our planning sessions, proof that the whole thing was calculated. If Marcus divorces me and she releases that information, I'll never be able to rebuild my career or my reputation." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the layers of manipulation and counter-manipulation that had been governing my family's behavior. Isabella had trapped herself in a web of lies that was now collapsing around her, and she was desperate enough to turn to the person she had betrayed for rescue. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," she said, reaching across the table as if to take my hand before thinking better of it. "But you're the only person who might be able to reach Marcus. He still cares about you. If you could talk to him, maybe convince him that divorce isn't the answer, that he should try to make things work with me." The audacity of her request was breathtaking. She wanted me to save the marriage that had been built on the destruction of my own relationship. She expected me to convince the man who had broken my heart to stay committed to the woman who had stolen him from me. "You want me to help? You keep a man who doesn't love you," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "You want me to convince him to stay in a marriage that makes him miserable so that you can avoid the consequences of your own choices." "I know how it sounds," Isabella replied quickly. "But think about it from his perspective. Marcus is a good man who made a mistake. He's been punishing himself for hurting you by staying in a marriage that doesn't make him happy. Maybe if you could forgive him, if you could give him permission to move forward with his life, he could find a way to be content with what he has." Her psychological manipulation was skillful, but transparent. She was trying to reframe her request as something that would benefit Marcus and even me, rather than acknowledging that she simply wanted to avoid the consequences of her deception. "Besides," she added, "what's the alternative? If Marcus divorces me and your mother exposes everything, the whole family will be destroyed by scandal. Daniel will be embarrassed by association. Your mother's reputation in the community will be ruined. Everyone will suffer because of mistakes that have already been made." The implicit threat was clear. If I didn't help Isabella maintain her marriage, she would allow my mother to destroy our entire family's reputation rather than accepting responsibility for her own choices. She was holding the rest of my family hostage to ensure my cooperation. I stood up to leave, having heard enough to understand the situation completely. Isabella had created a house of cards built on lies and manipulation, and now that it was collapsing, she wanted me to shore it up, rather than allowing natural consequences to unfold. "I'm not going to help you," I said simply. "You made your choices, and now you get to live with the results. If Marcus wants a divorce, that's his decision to make. If my mother wants to destroy your reputation, that's the consequence of accepting money to seduce someone else's fiancé." Isabella's face crumpled as she realized that her last desperate gambit had failed. "Please, Sophia, I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you. I have nowhere else to turn." "You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my life for money," I replied. "You made a calculated decision to treat people like chess pieces in a game only you knew you were playing." Now you get to experience what it feels like to be powerless in someone else's manipulation. I left the cafe without looking back, feeling a strange sense of closure that I hadn't expected. For over a year I had been carrying guilt and self-doubt about my failed relationship, wondering if I had been too insecure or demanding to keep Marcus's interest. Learning that our breakup had been orchestrated through calculated manipulation rather than natural incompatibility was oddly liberating. 2 weeks after my meeting with Isabella, I received a phone call from Daniel. It was the first time we had spoken since I had cut contact with the family, and his voice carried a tension I had never heard before. "Sophia, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Everything is falling apart, and I think you deserve to know what's happening." He explained that Marcus had indeed filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and seeking a clean separation without alimony or property disputes. Isabella had apparently had a complete breakdown, showing up at my mother's house at all hours, demanding that she fix the situation she had created. "Mom is panicking," Daniel continued. "She's realized that if the truth about what she did comes out, it won't just destroy Isabella's reputation. Her real estate career could be over. People won't want to work with someone who manipulates families and destroys relationships for personal gain." My mother had apparently been trying to pressure Marcus into reconciling with Isabella, using every manipulation tactic in her considerable arsenal. She had threatened to expose business secrets she claimed to know about his engineering firm. She had suggested that divorce would damage his professional reputation in their mall community. She had even tried to convince him that his feelings for me had been immature infatuation rather than genuine love. But Marcus had remained unmoved by her attempts at manipulation. According to Daniel, he had told my mother that he would rather face whatever consequences she threatened than spend another day married to someone he could never love. He told her that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't falling for Isabella's seduction, Daniel said. It was allowing himself to be convinced that what he had with you wasn't worth fighting for. The conversation with Daniel revealed another layer of complexity to the situation. He admitted that he had known about my mother's scheme from the beginning but had convinced himself that staying silent was the right choice for everyone involved. "I thought you would be better off without Marcus if he was the kind of person who could be manipulated into leaving you," he explained. "I thought Isabella deserved a chance at happiness after struggling financially for years. I thought Mom was just being protective of you in her own twisted way." But watching the aftermath of their deception had opened his eyes to the true cost of their choices. Marcus was obviously miserable and had been drinking heavily since the wedding. Isabella had become increasingly erratic and desperate as her marriage deteriorated. My mother was consumed with anxiety about protecting her reputation and was taking her stress out on everyone around her. "I should have warned you," Daniel said, his voice thick with guilt. "I should have told you what they were planning instead of convincing myself that it was for the best. You deserve to know the truth, and you deserve the chance to fight for your relationship if you wanted to." His apology was sincere but came too late to change anything significant. The damage had been done, relationships had been destroyed, and everyone involved would have to live with the consequences of their choices. 3 days after Daniel's phone call, Marcus appeared at my apartment. I hadn't seen him since our breakup conversation at the coffee shop over a year earlier, and the change in his appearance was shocking. He had lost weight, his clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested months of poor sleep. "I know I have no right to be here," he said when I opened the door, "but I need you to know the truth about what happened between us. I need you to understand that everything I told you about questioning our relationship was a lie." I invited him in, more out of curiosity than kindness. He sat on my couch like a man carrying an enormous weight, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as he struggled to find the right words. "Isabella showed me text messages," he began. "Messages between you and other men that made it look like you were emotionally cheating on me throughout our relationship. Your mother confirmed that you had been distant and secretive, that you had been questioning whether marriage was what you really wanted. The revelation that they had fabricated evidence against me was stunning in its cruelty. They hadn't simply manipulated Marcus's feelings, they had actively created false proof that I was betraying him. No wonder he had seemed so convinced that our relationship was fundamentally flawed. I believed them because I trusted your mother's judgment about you, Marcus continued. She had known you your entire life, and she seemed genuinely concerned about your commitment to our relationship. When Isabella started paying attention to me, started seeming interested in my thoughts and goals, it felt like proof that I deserved someone who appreciated me. He described the systematic way they had undermined his confidence in our relationship, while building his attraction to Isabella. My mother had shared private details about my insecurities and anxieties, painting them as fundamental character flaws, rather than normal human vulnerabilities. Isabella had positioned herself as everything I supposedly wasn't: confident, supportive, socially skilled, ambitious. I fell for it completely, Marcus admitted. I convinced myself that being with Isabella was the mature, responsible choice, that staying with you would be settling for comfort, instead of pursuing real compatibility. But the truth had begun to unravel almost immediately after our breakup. Isabella's behavior had changed dramatically once she no longer needed to maintain her carefully constructed persona. The confident, engaging woman who had captivated him during our engagement became demanding, manipulative, and emotionally volatile once they were alone together. She would have screaming fits if I mentioned your name, Marcus said. She would go through my phone looking for any trace of contact with you. She insisted that I delete every photo, every message, every reminder that we had ever been together. More disturbing was Isabella's treatment of him when they were in private versus public settings. Around others, she played the role of the devoted wife perfectly, praising his accomplishments and deferring to his preferences. But when they were alone, she was critical, controlling, and resentful of any attention he paid to his work or friends. It became clear that she had never actually loved me, Marcus continued. She had studied me like a subject she was trying to master, learning my preferences and interests so she could mirror them back to me. But she had no genuine appreciation for who I was as a person. The most damaging revelation had come when Marcus discovered financial documents showing the payments my mother had made to Isabella throughout their courtship. He had found them while looking for their marriage certificate, and had initially assumed they were loans or family support. But the timing and amounts made it clear that Isabella had been compensated for her role in seducing him away from me. That's when I realized I had been played, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. Everything about our relationship had been calculated and fake. Isabella had never cared about me as anything more than a means to financial security. Your mother had never cared about my happiness, only about getting rid of a daughter-in-law she couldn't control. He had confronted both of them with the evidence, demanding explanations for their deception. Isabella had broken down and confessed the entire scheme, begging him to forgive her manipulation and give their marriage a genuine chance. My mother had tried to justify her actions as protecting everyone from relationships that wouldn't have worked anyway. But the worst part, Marcus continued, was realizing what I had lost by believing their lies about you. I threw away a relationship with someone who actually loved me, for someone who saw me as a solution to her financial problems. He had spent months trying to convince himself that he could build a real marriage with Isabella despite the deceptive foundation. He had gone to therapy, both individually and with her, hoping to find a way to move past the betrayal and create something authentic together. But it was impossible, he admitted. Every time I looked at her, I remembered how easily she had lied to me. Every time she tried to be affectionate, I wondered if it was genuine or just another performance. I couldn't trust anything about our relationship because it had all started with manipulation. Marcus looked up at me with eyes full of regret and longing. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I destroyed something precious because I was too stupid and insecure to trust what we had together. But I need you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake I've ever made. I listened to his entire confession without interrupting, absorbing the validation that my instincts had been correct about everything. The relationship I had mourned had been real and valuable. The concerns I had raised had been legitimate. The people I had trusted most had been systematically betraying me while I blamed myself for being paranoid. I've filed for divorce, Marcus said, as his confession wound down. I can't stay married to someone who helped destroy the best thing in my life. I don't expect you to take me back, but I needed you to know the truth about what really happened between us." When he finished talking, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication that my perceptions had been accurate. Anger at the scope of the deception that had been perpetrated against both of us. Sadness for the time and trust that had been lost. But surprisingly, I also felt a sense of peace about the entire situation. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "It helps to know that our relationship was real, that my instincts about Isabella and my mother were correct. But Marcus, what happened between us can't be undone. Too much damage has been done for us to go back to what we had." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know. I just needed you to understand that choosing Isabella was never about you not being enough. It was about me being manipulated into believing lies about who you were and what you wanted." We talked for another hour, processing the revelations and their implications. Marcus shared more details about the emotional abuse he had endured during his marriage to Isabella, the way she had used his guilt about our breakup to control his behavior. I told him about my journey toward rebuilding my life and learning to trust my instincts again. By the time he left, we had achieved something I hadn't expected: closure. Not the kind that leads to reconciliation, but the kind that allows both parties to move forward with understanding and peace. Marcus would have to rebuild his life after divorce and learn to trust his own judgment again. I would continue building the independent, authentic life I had created in the aftermath of our broken engagement. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Marcus and Isabella's divorce had been finalized. Isabella had apparently moved back to California, unable to rebuild her reputation in Oregon after the truth about her manipulation became known. My mother had suffered significant damage to her real estate career, losing several high-profile clients who questioned her integrity after learning about her role in the scheme. Daniel and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship after he took responsibility for his role in the deception. He had apologized sincerely and consistently, making it clear that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal and was committed to earning back my trust. We now have regular contact, though our relationship will always carry the scars of what happened. As for me, I've continued to thrive in my career and personal life. I'm in a healthy relationship with Jake, the photographer I met during my rebuilding period. He knows the entire story of what happened with my family and has been incredibly supportive of my journey toward healing and trust. Most importantly, I've learned to value my own perceptions and instincts above other people's reassurances. The experience of being gaslit so thoroughly taught me that external validation means nothing if it contradicts what I know to be true about my own experiences. I still think about what might have been if Marcus and I had been able to work through our challenges together without my family's interference. But I've also come to understand that the person I've become through surviving this betrayal is stronger and more authentic than the person I was before it happened. Sometimes the most devastating experiences in our lives turn out to be the catalysts for our greatest growth. Learning that the people I trusted most were capable of such profound betrayal forced me to develop my own sense of worth and judgment. I no longer need anyone else's approval to validate my perceptions or choices. The family I was born into may have failed me, but I've built a chosen family of friends and partners who support my authentic self, rather than trying to manipulate me into being someone else. And that, ultimately, has been worth all the pain of discovering the truth about what really happened to my engagement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.